We will now be joined by our distinguished guest, Mr. Scott DeMuro, President of the Ohio Education Association. Welcome, President.
Thank you, Chair Richardson. Good afternoon. Good afternoon also to Ranking Member Isaacson, members of the committee. My name is Scott DeMuro. I'm a 32-year educator, currently serving as president of the Ohio Education Association, proudly representing our 120,000 educators across the state. We look forward to working with the members of the General Assembly to ensure all of our students, regardless of where they live, their race, or their family's income, have the resources and supports needed to thrive and succeed. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read all of our testimony. You have our written testimony, and I hope that you will take a close look at that. But I do want to hit on a couple of highlights before opening it up to questions. First off, on the issue of school funding, and you've heard many people bring this up, we certainly strongly encourage you to fully fund the Fair School Funding Plan, and critically important to update the cost data to use fiscal year 2022 instead of fiscal year 2018 data in doing that. We also encourage you to incorporate the cost studies, and very importantly to move forward with the economically disadvantaged cost study as we continue to work towards a constitutional system of funding our schools. Related to the last topic, we do strongly encourage restoration of the $50 million school bus purchase program that is eliminated in the executive version of the budget. I will say ditto to much of the things that were said by the previous speakers in terms of expansion of vouchers. Approximately 90% of Ohio students attend public schools. As we've said, this is an opportunity and an obligation to update and fully implement the Fair School Funding Plan. The dramatic expansion of vouchers undercuts the ability of the state to fund the public schools who serve those 90% of our students in each and every community across the state. Next issue I'll just mention is the Quality Community Schools Support Fund. The budget proposes to significantly increase funding for the Quality Community School Support Fund. It would provide outside the school funding formula an additional $3,000 for each economically disadvantaged student and $2,250 for each non-economically disadvantaged student. This is a proposed increase of $1,250 for both classifications of students. We oppose this provision. More than 10% of traditional public school districts do not even receive $2,250 per pupil in state funding. On the issue of literacy, we welcome the governor's focus on working to ensure every single one of our students is able to read proficiently, read fluently, and we ask that all of you seriously look at not just what does it take to impose some state-level mandates in terms of literacy instruction, but to truly get buy-in and meaningful implementation of that program. We know there are many unanswered questions right now. The Department of Education cannot answer the question of how many schools are currently adhering to science of reading principles, how many aren't, which begs the question, how do we know how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost to fully implement this program? So we'd encourage some flexibility in that regard. Listen to the voice of educators working every day with our students who are absolutely dedicated to the success of students. And one thing in particular that I would strongly urge the House to consider is removal of language that explicitly bans any particular instructional practices. If we have high-quality professional development and high-quality curricula that is implemented with fidelity across the state, there's no need for the heavy hand of state government to single out any specific instructional practices. In fact, that could lead to all kinds of unintended consequences and really create problems between educators and communities. I will conclude by just mentioning we have a number of recommendations related to addressing the educator shortage, including some feedback on some licensure provisions, and also urge the House to increase the state minimum teacher salary to $50,000. Be happy to answer further questions on that. So to conclude, we believe public education in Ohio matters. Across our state, public schools are at the heart of our communities. Ohio must ensure that all children have the opportunity for a quality education and resources that allow them to reach their full potential. Chair Richardson, this concludes my testimony. We look forward to working with the committee and the legislature on making improvements to House Bill 33, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions of the witness? Ranking Member Isaacson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, President DeMauro, for coming in today and for all the work you do for teachers and therefore for our kids in our schools. You know, we know that teachers and teacher quality are the #1 indicator of student success. And we've heard a lot about in this committee the ways in which Ohio has fallen behind in terms of student outcomes in education. And so what would it take and what would you lift up in what you're proposing today for Ohio to be the best place in the country for teachers, and in particular for teachers to be impactful in making a big difference in student outcomes and student achievement?
Yeah, Chair Richardson, Representative Isaacson, that is an excellent question. And I will say that as I talk to, our members across the state, one of the things that I think is just particularly infuriating to people is that decisions are made about the work that they do every day with students without listening to their voice. We are seeing an increasing number of people, good people, caring, committed people, who are leaving the profession, who are feeling burnt out. And part of that has to do with just not having adequate resources to meet the needs of the diverse students that they serve. But part of it also is just not feeling respected and supported and listened to. So I would say, if there's one message that I can convey on behalf of my colleagues, it is listen to the voice of teachers. Avoid, top-down mandates that we know over the course of, and we've seen, I will say throughout the course of my career, it's replete with failed efforts from federal government intervention, state government intervention that is all about using test scores as a way to charge accountability and changing the way we evaluate teachers. Listen to educators and honor the work that they've been trained and hired to do. And I think if we do that, we recognize that we all believe the exact same thing, and that is that we want every single one of our students, regardless of their background, to be successful. But educators sometimes are feeling a little beleaguered, and I think they need some love right now.
Follow-up? Representative Dobis.
Thank you for the question, Chair Richardson, Representative Dobos. That's an issue that's not directly addressed in the budget bill, but I am happy, since you asked the question, to put in a plug for a bill that was recently reintroduced as General Assembly by Representative Manning and Representative Robinson, House Bill 117, that would eliminate the mandatory retention component of the third grade reading guarantee. I think educators widely understand, and I think this is where a lot of the literacy initiatives are welcome, that we need to do what we can to make sure that we're teaching best practices in terms of understanding how students learn to read, being able to differentiate instruction for students, to provide early intervention and support before students get to third grade, but then particularly provide individualized attention to students who are struggling to reach grade level benchmarks. But what we know doesn't work is punishing students for not achieving a certain score on a single test on a single day. I would ask, and kind of related to the last question, that we trust teachers and principals, and especially parents, who form that essential team in determining on each individual student's, for each individual student, what the best course of action is if they're struggling to read. But requiring by the state that there's retention of students who fail the third grade reading test is counterproductive.
Follow-up? Representative Robinson?
Thank you. Appreciate setting the table for that plug for House Bill 117. That was great. Thank you, President DeMauro, for everything you do and for coming in to testify. I had two questions. The first was around, you probably have heard some of the testimony today about either failed schools or choice and different things of that nature. Can you just share with the committee a little bit your take on what would the backpack bill mean if that were to be put into the budget? And then also, what could be the unintended consequences if we continue to raise the eligibility on vouchers, and what has it done to our public schools?
Thank you, Chair Richardson, Representative Robinson. I think taking a look at the overall impact on the state budget, it is impossible to see how our public schools can be fully and fairly funded if you continue to see hundreds of millions of dollars taken off the table and essentially not available for public school funding. In particular, when you see that the majority of those dollars are going to subsidize families that, for whatever reason, long ago made the choice that they weren't going to send their kids to public schools. And so this is essentially a taxpayer-funded handout to those families that I don't think helps us achieve the goal of a constitutional system that really meets the needs of all students. The backpack bill, is, and again, there's a whole range of problems, and it depends on which one you're talking about. The Senate version of the backpack bill, has a price tag of, I believe, $536 million a year. The House version of the backpack bill, $1.1 billion a year through the creation of these education savings accounts that also allow families who attend completely unregulated, non-chartered, non-public schools and those to homeschool their families to get this, free money from the state in order to support those decisions. And again, that cost is just to pay for the people that are already doing that, let alone the impact that it has on students who might change their decisions based on those incentives. So I think that the fiscal impact is a real concern, but I think it's a real concern, for quality and the impact on those students. We know that education vouchers have not led to better outcomes. We heard reference by the previous speaker about the Cincinnati Enquirer in-depth study comparing the academic performance of students who took vouchers compared to their peers from the same neighborhoods, the same backgrounds, the same economic situation, who stayed in the public schools, and in 90% of the cases, the students who stayed in the public schools performed better. So that's a real concern. And again, the question of lack of level playing field. And really, I think the thoughtful question that's been raised, whose choice are we really talking about? Because if private schools continue to have, the flexibility to decide who they're going to serve and who they're not, then that's not a fair playing field at all. Regardless of, so that's just comments about the voucher issue in general. In terms of the proposal in House Bill 33, which is before you in this budget, raising the income threshold to 400% of poverty is essentially providing vouchers to families that make $120,000 a year, families of four. We don't see anything remotely approaching that in terms of eligibility standards for other kinds of programs, whether you're talking about food assistance or Medicaid. Why we would do this for a special handout to people that want to, use state taxpayer dollars to subsidize, private school tuition, I think is concerning. And then the other aspect of that, unfortunately, this isn't addressed in the budget bill, but the different versions of the backpack bill that would expand funding for people that homeschool their kids, we've seen examples of how lack of oversight can lead to some really horrific outcomes. So I think we have to bear in mind that the taxpayers of Ohio, we owe it to them to make sure that how their dollars are being spent is responsible.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yes, one last quick
Proceed.
follow-up. Thank you, Chairwoman. Another piece in the budget, I was just looking at it. As you know, we're putting funding in there potentially for school resource officers in every school in the state of Ohio. I'm just curious, and as you talk to teachers all over the state, last General Assembly, we voted to allow teachers to arm themselves in schools. If we are to invest in these school resource officers, do you think that opens the door to not necessarily needing that in the future? What do you hear from teachers? I'm curious.
Thank you, Chair Richardson, Representative Robinson. I will say that I think it's a positive step to see the state step up and provide resources to school districts to hire school resource officers if people in the local community believe that that is the best approach to safety and security in their schools. Far preferable to have people who are specialized in doing that work and fully trained providing those services, that protection to our students, than having minimally trained educators who already have other full-time jobs, asking them to perform a dual role and carry a weapon in school. We think that is very dangerous, and so this would be far preferable. That said, I know that somehow finding a way to ensure that districts aren't kind of facing the dilemma of, well, we want to hire a school resource officer, but we know there's a local share of that funding, and so it's still not going to get every district where they maybe need to be as far as like having that flexibility. Ultimately, I think ensuring some flexibility in how those funds are spent and embedding it in the formula to ensure that a base level of funding for everyone that includes safety and security and school resource officers as part of that would be an ideal approach.
Do you have a follow-up? I do, with regard to your SRO. I think you might have been here when I asked in the last witness, do you have any concerns about a retired law enforcement being hired as an SRO?
Thank you, Chair Richardson. Assuming that retired law enforcement have met all the training requirements that are asked of school resource officers, that would seem to be a logical pool of talent for that work.
Okay, thank you. And why specifically don't you support the alternative military educator license? Are there details that we should know or understand? Because compellingly, we're hearing of a challenge in hiring and finding and feeding the pipeline of teachers. So could you please address that?
Chair Richardson, the key in addressing all of these licensure issues is ensuring that we're providing opportunities and pathways for people who are committed and talented and have some background knowledge and skills to be able to enter into the profession. We believe that there are some existing alternative licensure programs and perhaps some programs that could be updated to ensure that people with relevant military experience could use those and that alternative pathway be made available to them to enter the profession. We have some concerns about just lowering standards, training and quality standards, without ensuring that the experience that someone brings to the table is truly relevant, on point for the particular position that they're going for. So we have, frankly, more significant concerns about a similar approach that is in separate legislation that's pending in the Senate. I think what is proposed in the executive budget proposal is superior to that, but that's something that we would welcome the opportunity to work with you to see if we can maybe tweak that language a little bit to ensure that there aren't any unintended consequences.
And I thank you for that. I'd be certainly willing to work with you on that. You did, in your testimony, address a recommendation of increasing the state minimum teacher salaries. And first of all, I just want to say, every time I get an opportunity, I want to say thank you to all of our teachers in the state of Ohio. It is a noble profession. But I'm looking at your numbers, and I'm thinking about the inputs that we're already looking and we're advocating to fund. And so my question for you is, with this recommendation, have you estimated or calculated what that additional increase would be for the state?
Chair Richardson, we have not, and I think there is an opportunity to really kind of look carefully at that issue. One thing that's clear is that a $30,000 salary is woefully inadequate if you're trying to encourage more people to go into the profession. We have 50% fewer people entering our colleges of education in the state of Ohio today than we did 10 years ago. And a big driving factor of that, we know, is the growing educator pay gap. People with similar educational experience or educational backgrounds going into other professions nationally on average make about 25% more than a starting teacher. And we're also seeing other states, all across the spectrum that are really investing in improving teacher salaries. Now we want to make sure that this isn't done in a way that imposes unfunded mandates on local school districts. We know that right now the average starting teacher salary is just under $40,000. So, some kind of phased-in approach, may be appropriate here. But we think it's really important to increase that minimum salary to really ensure that districts have some support so that we can attract the best and the brightest into our profession.
Thank you. And I believe you did not mention the FAFSA requirement that's actually in your testimony. I'd like to give you the opportunity to address that specifically. Sure.
Chair Richardson, we have some concerns about about adding graduation requirements for students. We have no concerns about encouraging as many students as possible to complete the FAFSA. We understand that is an opportunity for students to get ahead economically and to gain access to federal financial aid, grants and scholarships and so forth. Our concern is just solely we want to make sure that no student, given the complexity of graduation requirements that already exist in state law and seem to be added to, every couple of years, our concern was just adding another thing to that list for students.
Would you support educating about the FAFSA in lieu of a graduation requirement?
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. And my final question for you here is, we've had some conversations about the science of reading, and I understand your position on it. My concern right now is, if a student graduates from an institute of higher learning and does not have that training, and they're preparing to be a teacher, if they don't have that science of reading training, they come out graduating and come to work without that, which then becomes the responsibility of our educators to develop. Do you support adding that as a requirement in their institutions of higher learning?
Chair Richardson, yes. I mean, I think that's one of the issues is that I think the way the budget bill language is written is that it kind of nudges higher education to move in that direction, but then it mandates K-12 schools to professionally develop all their teachers in the next 2 years. It does seem to be a little bit more logical to make sure that all of our new teachers coming out of those ed prep programs are fully trained. And then we're strategic about identifying who exactly does need additional training and support moving forward. Instead of constantly retraining everyone, so starting with students in our higher ed programs, I think is a very solid start.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the witness? Thank you very much for coming in today, and thank you for all you do on behalf of education in the state of